Episode 4 Foxtrot/Waltz versus Gettin' Jiggy with it. Why misusing language is key to progress, but it's highly risky, at least for American English speakers. This episode is dedicated to Brian Tutolino, Marco Migliozzi, Elizabeth Kagan-White, Kaido Baher, and David Cathro. Ever hear of being divided by a common language? It may sound silly, however it can be true depending on how divergent the dialects in a language have become. Some time ago, Brian Tutolino, an old colleague from my previous former professional life, asked me this question. I admit to being intrigued by it because when I was learning English as a second language, which took me about 10 years to really get good at it, I struggled to reconcile what was academically correct versus what is socially accepted, which varied depending on what dialect may be dominant in a certain area. Some family, mainly my children and friends, still ask me about word origins, not just in English, which tells me I read too much and I really need a new hobby. I have to give some credit to Marco Migliozzi, an Italian, an old colleague also from a former professional life. Back in 2015, he asked me, well, what does guinea pig mean? And after I answered him, it's a test subject due to the practically ubiquitous use over few centuries in laboratory settings. I realized the English language, at least the vocabulary, changes frequently, as well as idiom usage. And for the record, I'm not a professional linguist. I just read a lot and listen to people from other countries as a habit. So therefore, I pay homage to Frank Zappa, specifically for his, if you want an education, go to the library quote. For sake of limiting scope of this episode, I will focus on American English, since Brian Tutolino asked me the question in that language. Examine salient language misuse root causes, explain some unexpected discoveries, and yes, the Kevin Bacon game. Misuse is defined by Oxford English Dictionary as the act of using something in a dishonest way or for the wrong purpose. This seems quite broad, and the word usage by various people across the United States proves its broad application. Think about it. Misuse of tax dollars, depending on your point of view. Free agents in professional sports if a team paid too much money for a free agent. Frank Zappa's classical music skills. If you're a fan of his Joe's Garage album, you probably are not a fan of his Peaches and Regalia composition. Naming a few examples. Language is defined by Oxford English Dictionary as a use by humans of a system of sounds and words to communicate with respect to scope of this episode. So people use sounds and words to express ideas, especially complex ones. When a standard English sentence is minimally comprised of a subject and a verb, it's no wonder people such as Stephen Douglas, also known as the Little Giant, talked for a long time compared to Abraham Lincoln. 1 hour to talk about 5 minutes worth of stuff versus 5 minutes for 5 minutes. Dialect is a form of a language that is spoken in one area with grammar, words, and pronunciation that may be different from other forms of the same language. One way language is misused is when a community of people use a dialect of language that makes sense to them, but to another authority, whether academic or some government-sanctioned entity, which is non-existent in the United States, since the United States technically does not declare English as its official language, which is quite odd since the U.S. citizenship exams include proficiency in English. Its use is incorrect. Since the United States does not set English, any dialect, as the official standard, determining language misuse becomes a comparative exercise. For example, Boston's South End versus New Orleans' French Quarters, counties versus parishes. Languages may have a few or many dialects, where dialects may be so divergent to the point people speaking different dialects may not understand each other at all. Dialect variation may be driven by population, geographic separation, neighboring foreign language influences, inventions, and yes, acronym misusage. Come to think of it, I'm sure there are many linguistic academics who can best explain root causes of dialects formations. That's a good topic for someone else to explore for either a master's thesis or for another YouTube channel away from this channel. Some American movies explore this theme quite a bit. For example, John Leguizamo played the role of Pestario Rivera Garcia Picante Salsa Vegas. Yes. In a 1997 comedy movie called The Pest, where he hides from the Scottish Mafia by disguising himself as a Chinese waiter, and after using gibberish to answer the manager's Chinese questions, finally revert to English. Cantonese and Mandarin sound quite different from each other. Just ask around. Language misuse in general becomes either accepted as a habit/trend in the US Air Force context, rejected, or ignored altogether. What would incentivize communities to accept language misuse? On the surface, it's easy to use culture and younger generation to explain it away. But people change when they respond to changes that make sense to them, irrespective of whether the incentives make sense to the observers or not. Think about technological advances. The term automobile wasn't so fashionable until Henry Ford came around in the early 1900s. Missile, derived from the 17th century Latin word mittere, it really wasn't fashionable until at least Werner von Braun came over, clearly when the writing was on the wall, to the Allied side. Google started being used as a verb after the company of the namesake became ubiquitous. On a side note, Google, spelled Googol, means 10 to the 100th power. Pinging a device on the internet required Sonnet to evolve to its commercial version, in a format known as IP version 4. Although the credit for ping being used as a verb should really go to the US Navy submarine community. Remember Sean Connery's character in The Hunt for Red October with his "one ping only" command? Look it up. Looking further into technology, the cybersecurity field's dominant language is expressed in English. This seems rather one-sided, as some prolific cybersecurity experts come from Russia, think about Eugene Kaspersky, Estonians, there's a lot of them, Finland, thank you Linus Torvalds, and Bulgaria, Dark Avenger of the 1990s. Their native languages clearly aren't based on Germanic nor Latin. It's more Slavic and Indo-Hungarian, therefore voodoo for vodka and vesi to vin/vita to vodka. But cybersecurity is supported by software technology advancements derived from the United States Silicon Valley industries, along with supporting documentation in English. This goes back several decades, so this is where having supporting documentation be in English has helped English become the unofficial language of cybersecurity. Music, more on the artistic side of things where expressions of new ideas is expected, is rife with language misuse. Think of the band Three Dog Night and their song Joy to the World. It has a grammatically nonsensical verse. I'll throw away the cars and the bombs and wars. What? It's arguably quite memorable in the classic rock listener's mind. Rick James's Superfreak speaks for itself. Blow Daddy! Extremes Get the Funk Out with its, in my personal opinion, most impressive guitar solo. What do they mean by funk? It's not just rock music though. Rap music is rife with language misuse. Think about Sir Mix-a-Lot. Baby got back, and not necessarily about a spine. Ma hoopty, and it's reference to when my Benz is in the shop. FYI, a German equivalent for hoopty, jalopy, Peter, old car is. This is more literal translation, so it's more academic than it is commonly used. Sehr Altengebracht wagen. LL Cool J with this, Mama said knock you out. Is this in reference to Who's Your Mama? I think so. Will Smith with his Gettin' Jiggy with it is easier to follow syntax-wise, but the unusual spelling of wit and jiggy requires watching the music video to better understand his dialect. Disclaimer, I admit to being the analytical type, definitely not the literary one. It's also in pop music too. Think about Kellis with her milkshake. Is a milkshake better because it has more flavor in it? Britney Spears with her Baby Hit Me One More Time. Hit her with what? And Don't Look Back in Anger by Oasis. That song is really hard to follow from a grammatically correct, at least in the literal sense of the lyrics, point of view. Commercials are notorious for this too. Lester Spade played the role of Terrible Terry Tate in the Reebok's Office linebacker commercial series. Think about quotes such as, "You kill a Joe, you make some more!" Or, "You know Triple D's gonna dance that nonsense." Okay. Triple D's a hitter, not a quitter. Believe that. And the grammatically sensible, yet quite memorable, "You can't bring a humpty hump up to the bumpity bump." Budweiser was famous in 1999 for its What's Up series, including a reference to wasabi. Miller Lite even published the Man Laws ads featuring the late Burt Reynolds in the mid-2000s, paying homage to the Knights of the Round Table. Some academics also contribute to this linguistic evolution too. Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner coined the Freakonomics terminology to explain how people's incentives are unique to them. Therefore, understanding their incentives from their point of view is critical to encouraging change, whether positive or negative. First of all, freak is normally its own standing noun, not necessarily a prefix. If anything, what we have here is German language influence on English, where new ideas are expressed by assembling various words together to form this 12-letter word. But let's be fair about this. That's nothing compared to Der Altenwagen and its 23 letters. On a more somber note, notable US politicians have a habit of using words in unexpected context and with undefined parameters. Ben Shapiro, famous for "facts don't care about your feelings" statement, routinely points out how politicians use evil to make their opponents appear terrible or untenable without defining what they mean by the word usage. In fairness, media doesn't help with its 30-second clips, since that format makes it difficult for any politician to make any meaningful arguments armed with both valid and sound premises. Politicians are often accused of flip-flopping or waffling too. Since when did a type of footwear become a verb? Or in this case, food? I guess I could spend the remaining episode on this topic, but that's really best left for political commentators such as Larry Elder and Don Lemon. So how did these things come about? In technology, the general theme is that whomever invents and establishes the industry standard sets the language format and tone. IBM and Sun Microsystems were the early pioneers of DOS, Disk Operating System, and Unix. Modern-day programming environments have the DOS and the Unix legacy in their programming syntax, such as tar for archive/backup operations in Linux, since tar is short for tape archive in Unix. And yes, when one attends DEF CON or Black Hat, in general, if the lectures are conducted in any language at all, it's going to be in English. It's a function of path of least resistance when you think about it. Even if Cisco publishes all their operation system manuals in another language, would the open source community be adamant that manuals be translated into their respective native languages and be successful? One application of technology worth mentioning is the use of mobile phones. Even though notable mobile phone companies include Nokia, Sony, and Samsung, thanks to Motorola, not only have these companies marketed their products in English, their usage in various countries have introduced English isms into mobile phone dialogues. Look at Europeans. People from France all the way to Estonia answer their telephones with allo or hello, with H being silent for French, of course. This wasn't the case with landline telephones. It used to be digo in Spanish, at least from high school Spanish to the class in the early 1990s. Thanks, Mrs. Cooper! Music seems to have a variety of reasons for how it makes certain dialect isms be readily understood by broader audiences. Tommy James, famous for the Tommy James and the Shondells Band, penned the Moni Moni song. Let's think about this. Moni is not a conventional name. So how did he come up with Moni? It actually turns out after he wrote the song, he saw a sign out of his apartment window for Mutual of New York, M-O-N-Y. This actually gives some credence to the genius of Weird Al Yankovic and his parody of the song called Alimony from his Even Worse album. It's all about the Benjamin/Pentium baby. Some music references end up being used in an unrelated discipline/field. For example, when Tim Kitzrow was recording announcer one-liners for NBA Jam video game series, his "Boom Shakalaka" was actually borrowed from "I Wanna Take You Higher" by Sly the Family Stone. I should note that in the song, it's actually "Boom Laka Laka Laka." Yet more people, at least basketball video game players, are more familiar with "Boom Shakalaka" as well as its associated "He brought the boom but not a lot of shaka" one-liner. Pop music used to have radio airwave time dominance back in the day, which made certain phrases more commonly understood by populations not previously aware of song origins. However, with the advent of pick your favorite Spotify/YouTube's and so forth channels, pop music has given way to whatever people want to listen to. On a related note, this may encourage social polarization. Rock music may have less sway here, especially for music with substantial amounts of instrument highlights. Many guitar players still recognize the the jangle of the Gibson EDS 1275 12-string guitar on Stairway to Heaven, but may not recall "Forests will echo in laughter" so much. Yet for a broad audience who pay attention to the lyrics, singing the memorable lyrics, no matter how nonsensical, yields some form of therapy. At least this is what the 28 Days movie with Sandra Bullock and Viggo Mortensen with "Jeremiah was a bullfrog" leads the audience to believe. Politicians seem to use language that sounds extreme yet lacks substantiation. For example, unless politicians are willing to spend a few hours not just stating their opinions, but also justifying them, i.e., Joe Rogan with Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard, these people really don't have any other outlets, except for maybe writing books, which requires the casual listener to give up watching Monday Night Football, to use, at a minimum, syllogism, which is basically two premises and a conclusion, irrespective of whether the argument is sound or not, to convince voters to vote their way. This is an interesting problem. Politicians are motivated to keep getting re-elected, in general, so they are motivated to say and do what convinces people to re-vote for them. So they do things such as engage in excessive hyperbole, thank you Gus Bakoyannis, knowing that probability works in their favor for breaking campaign promises. So the voters who keep voting for politicians who misuse language, in a sense, are responsible for encouraging our politicians to abuse language, or at least use extreme language in implied different context. One thing Henry Rollins points to is the idea of dumbing down the voting population. There are many academics and politicians who take extreme views on this conclusion. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here to bash anyone, irrespective of this civil discourse outcomes. But our society doesn't have the same elements of reducing linguistic intelligence as the 1984 book written by George Orwell back in 1949. In that book, newspeak is where super is replaced with plus good. It's one way to reduce linguistic vocabulary, effectively reducing one's ability to express different ideas. It tells me if Henry Rollins, Henry, for what it's worth, I'm a huge fan, is correct on this topic, our society still has a chance to recover. Public school agendas aside, which is a different debate for a different group of experts, the United States is missing two major ingredients. One is language standardization/control, since the United States doesn't cite English as the official language. The other is seeing our politicians use simpler, if anything, their rhetoric is difficult to substantiate on their own, vocabulary to make their opponents appear reprehensible. After examining a variety of examples and plausible root causes, I come back to Brian Tuzolina's question. It seems like a combination of causes. Some are just what makes it to a community that becomes widespread, either through popularity or innocent misapplication. Others involve the portmanteau concepts such as freakonomics. Finally, some people, i.e. politicians, they abuse language in order to manipulate voters to re-vote for them, since their incentive is to engage in excessive hyperbole to get re-elected, even after breaking campaign promises, irrespective of factors beyond their control, and so forth. Also, making money is quite a motivational factor. Just ask Puff Daddy. Don't forget Tommy James and the Shondells with Moni Moni and I Think We're Alone Now being covered by Billy Idol and Tiffany, as well as Three Dog Night with its Joy to the World. In the United States, language evolution is more rampant than in other nations, Quebec and France, for example, since it doesn't dictate how English is to be used. This is quite evident when one considers where a preponderance of music, movies, and television is produced. Thank you, Hollywood, as well as Motown. As well as language misuse is, Nashville, Tennessee, Graceland. As long as language misuse is coupled with something people want to pay attention to, the misuse will most likely become accepted as being normal over time. Just look at Pitbull and how he incorporates various musical themes into his songs, such as 75 Brazil Street into his Calle Ocho, I Know You Want Me, even though he's American of Cuban descent. Alright, it's time for the Kevin Bacon game. By 3 degrees of separation, our society owes a debt of gratitude to the founding fathers, including Marie-Joseph, Paul Yves Roche, Gilbert du Motier, Marquis de Lafayette. also known as Marquis Lafayette, for setting the conditions necessary for Americans to replace French with English as a language of diplomacy. The Founding Fathers rejected the Windsor government system, leading to prominent immigrants to use English as they see fit, which then yielded an English-speaking, just don't ask the British, especially the Scots, alliance, bringing about the Marshall Plan, eventually leading to the United States using English as one of its 6 official languages. And yes, some parts of NATO, especially the French-speaking ones, they are screaming in horror at this conclusion. But at least it shows new concepts are just a linear function of time. Just look at the introduction of the waltz from the German word Waltzer and Foxtrot. Thank you, Irene and Vernon Castle, and as of the 1990s, is getting jiggy with it. Na 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 na. Thank you for listening, everybody. If you have any questions or want to leave any comments or suggestions regarding what you'd like to hear about as in the future, I'm all ears. If you want to subscribe, great. But most importantly, please take the time to come to your own conclusions by thinking for yourselves. Until next time.